Hey guys, so this is gonna be a kind of um, primer, if you like, into my workflow. I thought I would maybe, I don't know if you can see me so well, but I thought I would share it with you guys that are curious about doing 3D modeling as a hobby, or maybe one day in the future freelance or working in the industry, right? Um, bit about me, self-taught from the 80s with pixel art right through to 3D when it kind of first started, but never really entered the industry till 2012, and it was in a kind of indie format. It wasn't really in a big studio or anything like that, so pretty low key. Um, and yeah, I've done loads of stuff since then: mobile, VR, a couple of console games. Nothing too exciting. Very broad-ranged skill set. Nothing. I don't really have a specialism or a specialist role. More of a generalist with some technical abilities like programming, making tools, and there's little solutions like that. Anyway, this is 3ds Max, and you can see I've just made a box. How did I make this box? Well, you probably won't see all these buttons. These are my modifier presets. You get a big huge list of modifiers. In order to make a box, you go to this plus here, make a box. You first click to initiate, and you're holding that button down to drag. Let go. Now you're doing the height, and click. That's it, finished. Then once you've done it, you can play with the values here. Play with subdivisions. If you can't see the subdivisions, press F2, and sorry, F3. Don't know what F2 did there, but F3 should show you, F4, sorry, will show you the wireframe over the mesh, and F3 will show you the wireframe on its own, and F1 is help. Okay, they toggle, right? Very easy to remember that. So you can preset subdivisions. Now this is a kind of a standard box, right? Think of it as a primitive. It is a primitive, right? So you can set the number of loops for height and stuff like that. Right down here, you'll see the absolute position of this particular object based on its pivot point. If you right click these, you can reset them to 0. I always like to work in 0 because it helps in the future for things like symmetry, you know, doing some sort of radial thing where you know where the center is. It's always good to work in the center. So once you've got this box, there's different ways to add edit poly. You can right click and do convert to edit poly. Edit mesh is kind of rubbish, it's old, right? It's probably one of the first things they did, but it works differently. Poly is what you want because you get more options with it, and it's great. So you can either do it that way, or you can add it as a modifier. When you add something as a modifier, it's toggleable, right? So if I'm in edit poly, I can open up and go to each subcomponent, like polygons. I can also do the same thing here. Element is any part that's got connected faces. That's one whole thing. Face is a face or polygon. This is an open border, which in this case there is none. This is your edges, and this is your verts. Right, you can choose them here. You can also press 1 for verts, 2 for edges. If you press it twice, it will go back to the top of the stack, which in some cases you need to do that, right? Because you can basically add modifiers to sub parts in some cases, depends on the modifier. Okay, so 2 give you edges, 3 give you borders if there's any. Okay, these are just switching to these modes, and then you can select. And the cool thing is it will remember selections, right, between each thing. So edges, it's remember the edges. Polygons is remember the polygons. And you can actually convert by holding control and clicking, and it will now select the faces that were selected now as edges, and control click the verts. The edges that were selected, the verts of the edges that were selected, and so on. You can go between whatever you want. I choose this face, control click, and I've got the verts, right? That can be useful. So I'm going to choose this face and delete it. Just delete, and then this means open edge, open border. And I can extrude this, right? If I hold down shift and just drag it across there, and I can extrude out the way. Right, and if I want to close it, I just go to cap, like that. So a good rule about modelling is to stick to quads as much as possible. If you need to use a triangle, triangle will become 3 quads if you subdivide. So for example, if I put a deliberate cut in here, so I'm going to choose those 2 points, right, control to select both and choose connect, right, basically got 2 triangles. And if I subdivide this, which in this case it's a modifier called turbo smooth, you can see how these have turned into 4-sided faces. N-gons are a no-no. Triangles and polygons are good. If possible, try to avoid big long thin triangles or triangles that look like they're about to overlap each other, or anything weird like that, because as you see it messes up the normal shading, right? The calculation for the shading. If you have got something like that, you can always optimize, choose those verts and then like weld them together, right? And we use these optimization tricks. For example, if this was my final shape, all of this edge loop stuff is redundant, doesn't do anything, right? Doesn't add to it. There's different ways to get rid of it. I can go to edges and double click and it will choose the edge loop and do control and backspace, right? And that's some form of optimization done there. You can go even further and use target weld. So you drag, you first click and hold and drag as if to say, right, this is the vert I've clicked and that's where I want it to go. You can do it that way. Right, even then I can go back to edges by pressing 2 and doing control backspace. Now you can see what I've got here is an n-gon. It doesn't look like an n-gon, but there's a vert here. So I just move it to the side, you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. Right, we just need to tell it which way the triangulation is going to go. So I'm going to control and click that vert and click connect. Right, that's optimized something, not all of it. I'm going to press 2, double click edge. I pressed Q actually to come out of move mode because sometimes you don't want to accidentally move something in some cases. So Q will be back to select. If your Q is cycling through these different selection modes, which is bloody annoying, you'll have to go to your hotkeys, shortcut keys, which is under, depending on the version of Mac you're using, but I think you can go to customize user interface and just type in select, and if I remember right, it is, I've seen it a second, select object, right? I think, what's that, rectangular selection region? Let's just try selection, because I'm pretty sure like I've maybe assigned it twice to different stuff. Select object. Right, seems to be that one. You just don't want it to be cycling through these. Right, so I've just set it to select object. Right, so it's kind of in a select object mode. Right, it won't come out of the stack here, so anything, let's talk about this later, right? There's some cases where, let's just show you what I mean. Like let's say I choose this face, right? I'm just going to move it there like that, and I do turbo smooth. Now turbo smooth happens on the whole mesh regardless of the face, but let's say I do something like tessellate. Tessellate can happen on the component, right? It can happen on the selected faces, and the cool thing is I can go back to this stack here, choose another polygon, and then that will get affected by these. You can see this little square actually means you've been in a component, right? You can see when I jumped out of the component how it's went back to everything. So I'll jump back to the top of the stack. That's basically what I would get if I collapsed everything, right? Collapse 2. That's baked in there, right? It's done its own form of triangulation here, and as you can see it's a bit messy with this shading. And sometimes you just want to control that with an intermediate point and so on. Right, so you can do stuff like that. Sorry, that was a little bit probably a jump ahead, but if you're going to do a modifier on the whole object, it's just a good idea to click on the top of the stack. You can also press 6. Right, so if I'm on there, I can press 6, I'll go to the top. If I'm on there and I press 1 again, it's kind of like toggling between, right, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6, right? And shortcut keys are good. They speed up your workflow, to keep your creative juices flowing. So I'd say get used to shortcut keys pretty early. You'd be amazed how much it gets rid of constraints and demotivation and stuff like that, because nothing worse than trying to find something in the menu. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is what will take you through them. This whole stack is basically a kind of editable stack system, right? So I can turn that off and we went back to the state of what the box was. If I suddenly want to add some things and go back and go here, it's going to not calculate the same thing because the faces have changed, right? There's a different vertex orders, different number of faces. Everything that it knew was a lie. Okay, so basically that. So I would just go back, I could easily just go back to this, turn it back to 3, right, and it's good again because it's looking at the same point order, and that's just the way it goes. So you can do something like that, right? And let's say I wanted to optimize this. I'm just going to do another edit poly, and you can rename it if you want. I'll just call it optimize. Right, I need to watch I don't get confused with the actual modifiers. Optimize, right? So I would do something like E optimizing, right? E for editing. If I really wanted to name my process, right, it just helps if you're going to toggle things. And then I'll do something like, let's say that was my final shape, and I've already optimized a little bit there. How more could I optimize it, right? And I'm going to talk about a few other things like triangulation, how it makes shapes like these, or it makes shapes like these, right? And this can be very important for a few reasons. Sometimes you want to force the triangulation to go with the shape that you want. Sometimes you need triangulation so the bake will be clean when you put it into a different game engine, because if you don't, it will triangulate it its own way. So you want to be certain it's triangulating your way. You don't necessarily have to triangulate your mesh and start trying to work on it, because that becomes messy. But you want to keep your quads so you can add edge loops and just have more control over it as much as possible. You can do triangulation on export anyway if you really need, and you would do that for maybe baking, and you're certain it's going to go into a game engine, right, and you're not sure of how the triangulation is going to go. There might be other ways to control it, but that's as much as I know. So things like that. Let's start optimizing this. So the first thing I do is do target weld. So where's my target weld? So under verts, target weld, and just click, drag, let go. Oops. Click, drag, let go. You can always right click to cancel, but you'll need to re-choose target weld again. I've got it shortcutted to Control T, and I don't know if that's a default. I've changed the shortcut keys that much that I forget. Right, so these don't change the shape, and I don't need them to change the shape there, so I'll move these there. Obviously I'm just making a low poly style asset here, and you've probably heard of high poly stuff. In that case you would want to do a high poly version and get details. We can talk about that soon, right? But for now, this is going to be our little process here. Okay, the only thing left to optimize is the base. So let's put them there, there, and this to there, right? And you might think, oh, that's so optimized, but it's wrong, right? It's wrong because these verts, these verts that you've put there, right? Or these ones rather that you put there. I forget what I did now, but anyway, let's try and work out what I did, if it's possible. I don't think it is, so I've overwritten the history. But basically, if you do silly shit like that, well, you can. It doesn't always let you. That's the nice thing about Max. It doesn't always let you do silly things, right? It knows it can't weld to there. Now, if you tried that in Maya, it probably would let you do it. But there's certain things you just can't do. I think this was, yeah, this was okay. Right, this was okay, right? So I'm just welding like that. That's optimized with triangle, quad, right? But you'll probably see earlier in the video I made a mistake and it did all sorts of weird shading, right? You just have to be logical about it. Like, is this an actual face, or is it made up of other verts that I can't see? So you switch to vert mode and you can see every vertex, right? You can also click one and just move it just to make sure it's doing what you expect. And you're probably thinking, why am I getting a triangle there? Well, every polygon is made of two triangles, right? And earlier I was talking about the well, it's gone now, but the problem with the triangulation. So I'm going to turn this off just so I can talk about that. So that's optimizing, right? That's now an optimized mesh that matches the shape that we wanted. Okay, we're going to go down to that part of the stack there. I'm going to hide this and do another edit poly. So you can always go here and do edit poly and it will add it to the stack, right? So it's not going to be the same thing, it's going to be another layer of editing, right? And I'm just going to rename this to edit triangulation, right? I'll just do, yeah, that's fine. Let's say you wanted to fix this problem of the shape, but you like this shape, right? There's different ways to force it. You can go into the vertices, choose this one, and do connect, right? That's now an actual physical cut through those, and you can do the same for each of these, right? And do connect. You see it's connected these ones as well. If you don't want it there, just select it and do control backspace if you just want that to be a quad, so you can add like edge loops and stuff. You can't add edge loops where there's a triangle, right? That's one reason why people say avoid triangles, because if they need to add more edge loops to a mesh and it sort of terminates there, right, they're going to get problems with it, right? It's going to be like spaghetti eventually and all messy. So that is the only case. Triangles aren't bad if you want to control your faces, then you can do that way. Right, I was doing a shortcut for connect there because you see me do that very quickly. So you've now got the shape you want there. Another way to do it, let me just hide that and do edit poly, rename, I'll just call turn tries, TURN. I don't think it's working today. Okay, right, turn tries, and in this mode you would click on your polygons, you would go to turn, and suddenly you'll see the triangulation of each face. This is the ground truth, right, of every polygon in any 3D application. This is how your graphics card processes polygons. The whole four-sided shape is kind of like, you know, human engineering has made that happen so that we can add edge loops and all sorts of other neat things. but back in the day you would see a whole lot of triangle based stuff, like when there was no real texture maps and stuff like that. Everything would just be triangles, and that was basically, it's still the same, it's just basically what graphics cards use, and we've kind of made it quads are kind of like the way it goes. So you can see how this quad is split in here. That's why it's making that shape. As soon as I turn that, it's fixed. Right? It's fixed. And you can do the same for any part that you want to control the shape. And that's the easiest way to do it, but there's no guarantee that if I was to export this to something else, that it would retain that shape. I could try a few examples just to show you, right? Let's try Marmoset Toolbag, right? Let's see if it messes up or something. So I just need to jump to this, and okay, right. So Marmoset Toolbag 3, and let's export this model without triangulation checked, because that's where people might forget if they need to do it or not, right? If you're only ever going to show your model in Marmoset Toolbag and it looks right when you have big textures and stuff, then it's fine. It can just stay there. But sometimes when you export the same model to Unreal with the same big textures from Marmoset, and you've not triangulated the mesh, Unreal might turn some of those triangles, just like you saw me do. Right, so just be mindful of that. It's called test, right? Everything's called test these days. Test box. Now I doubt it will do it, but it's worth checking. I think I had triangulation off. Yeah. Okay, so there you go. It's done it wrong, right? So just it actually proves why you should. Why is it also upside down? Is that just because I did that? Yeah, at the bottom. Okay, if I turn on the wireframe here, you'll see this better. Right, look how it's made that indented shape here, and here, and here, and here. So basically, when I've imported this, Marmoset has decided that it's not going to do the triangulation that way, the way I've told it to, right? I've physically told it to do that. Well, I wouldn't say physically, it's done through the turn edges, but it's changed the shape of my model, right? Let's see what Marmoset Toolbag 4 does. Probably the same algorithm, to be honest. So they've got their own internal algorithms that decide, yeah, same deal. Right, it's done it to all four corners, it's folded them inwards. Right, and you can't see the triangulation here. That would be nice as well, like to see the triangulation in these this tool, just to make sure it's not changing something. Okay, so you would force those things through cutting them. Let's also check Sketchfab. I'm really curious, and this will give you a little kind of idea of how to upload stuff as well. I'll just go here, and let's see if it's also got that an algorithm that's making it different. I don't know the exact reasoning behind the algorithm, whether it's the shortest distance or something to do with the point order. It could be a mixture of both, it could be one or the other. Right, so I've imported the mesh, and let's just check it. Well, first it's wrong way around, but it doesn't matter. It's done it right this time. You see how every edge is correct? Let's look at the wireframe for that, if it's possible. Yeah. Right, and we don't see the triangulation, but look how it's done those edges right. So there's the perfect example of it turning the internal edges of polygons, which are made of two triangles always, how it's turned them So in that case, if you are baking and if you intend to bake in Marmoset Toolbag, a character, props, anything, and it's going to go into the game engine, you need to triangulate it so that it's always the same triangulation, right? Again, there might be other ways about it if someone knows the algorithm, or there's some checkbox that you can press that sorts the algorithm a certain way so that it always comes in as you expect it. Right, but otherwise, the way to get around that, if you don't want to add any triangulation, especially in the software, I don't want to do any cuts or manually do anything, right? So this one we have, yeah, we've manually fixed the edges, and I would do export selected test box, let's do underscore try, and I would check this triangulate box, right? So if someone says to you, don't triangulate the mesh because I'm gonna rig it and animate it, what you're gonna do if you need to do the texture baking, you can't really texture bake from there. I mean, I suppose you maybe could, but like you need to be dead set your UVs are grey and a texture test is done. Then you can give it to your rigger for rigging and animating, and they would send a copy of their mesh out to you for triangulating. But I don't think it's really possible to transfer skin weights between non-triangulated and triangulated meshes. So if you know what I'm trying to say, is that there comes a point in the pipeline where you have to decide if the mesh is going to be triangulated or not. And that can be a real mess if you've got a triangulated mesh that needs rigged and skinned, because selecting ring loops and stuff you can't do when it's triangulated, right? And you might want to choose like a loop around the arm of verts to skin weight and grow skin weight and whatnot. And you're gonna have to like do a bit more manual fiddly picking and stuff. It wouldn't be, a nightmare or out the realms of normality. I'm pretty sure there's lots of companies have triangulated meshes that need skinned and rigged if they're doing their normal maps, as I expect. Okay, let's just do an import of the triangulated one, and let's just move that side. Right, so you can see how the triangulated one is obviously keeping the shape that was in 3ds Max's viewport. It's not decided, oh, by the way, I've changed my mind about how it looks here. I'm actually gonna cut these this way before you export. It won't do that. It will always be based on the edit triangulation here, right? If you turn them the way you want, that's what Max will export, what you see, right? So there's nothing to worry about there. Of course, the other way is to actually just make 4 shortcuts like that, right? And this is probably the most common, to force your triangulation the way you want it. You would do this at an optimization stage anyway, or retopology and stuff. Another thing to cover, so let me just do edit poly here, just leave it as it is. Optimizing further, right? In some cases, you might think, I need this edge because it changes the shape, right? But it doesn't really. If I Control T and target weld this to there, there's no shape change, right? The shape didn't change, right? The shading changed a little bit, but we don't care about that if we're doing a low poly style or whatever. Okay, so optimize your meshes where they don't change the shape is kind of the general rule of thumb. Another thing to cover, let's do a different mesh for this one. Let's say you've got a tube, right? Just a general tube. I'm just gonna drag this out and give it a bit of height, right? And this is your tube that you put into your game engine, and it's a well or something, right? It's guys standing there, and it's kind of like a well. Okay, and you've got tons of these wells, right? Maybe the whole world's made of wells. It's all about searching wells for something. There's a game idea for you. But you've not optimized, right? There's nothing optimized here. And the other thing why you should optimize it will make your UVs, making UVs easier. Because if you've got like a shit ton of polys, it'd take longer to unfold and also be more problematic. So I've got the primitive tube, edit poly on top of it, start making edits. So you can double click these, hold control if you want to do more, control backspace. The same thing in Maya, as far as I know, control backspace. Right, that's still the same shape. Right. Another thing that annoys me, or is worthwhile pointing out, is when someone does like a wheel or something for just a regular, like say a cart or something, or like a trebuchet, or I don't know, anything at all, right? They'll have basically something like that for the resolution of their wheel, right? But then they might have some kind of let me just rotate this way so it looks correct, and then they might have an exhaust pipe, and they simply just gonna scale this down or whatever, right? And that's their exhaust pipe, right? Something like that. And you're thinking, this looks perfectly nice and round. It looks like an exhaust pipe with enough polys to justify the roundness, but this is just a scaled up version of that, and it's jank. You should complement the roundness depending on the size and keep that kind of, the complementary between round things kind of consistent, right? It gets to the point where you get like nuts and bolts and stuff, and they can be smaller. They can even be done by texture, right? You can just do a normal bump on them or something. But something like this, I would totally trying to make it, for the size of it, the same kind of quality of roundness of this one. So probably 24 sides, right? Oops, definitely don't want that. Maybe even 30 sides. And you notice how I'm sticking to numbers that are multiples of 3 or 6 or 9, right? Because 360 is 1 degree per face, right? It only goes to 200, so you can do 180. So one face is like 2 degrees, 90, 45, right? We could also do 360 divided by 10, which is 36. Okay, or yeah, 30. Right, I just like these numbers because they put the edge at the right place as well. Top, left, bottom, right? And that can be useful if you want to do some kind of quad-based symmetry. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just show you. Let's just work on this one. So Alt and Q will let you work on a single object. Alt and Q again will come out of it. If that doesn't work, I'll be surprised. I think that's a built-in feature. I think. Anyway, I've done a shortcut key for it. So edit poly on top of that. I'm going to choose the top one and the bottom. I'm not going to worry about n-gons right now because I'll sort them later. In fact, I won't be able to do any sort of connect base cut here. I have to do Shift C, or sorry, cut, because that's another control shortcut. So cut here, the first vert I choose to the last vert, click and escape, or Q actually, to come out of it. It always leaves a little bit residue on the screen for some reason. Right, and sorry if there's a bad quality stream because I'm streaming with a 4K monitor. Right, so you do something like that, okay, and that's you got your quads. And then you do something like right click, inset. Don't go too far with that because it'll overlap itself. That's why you get these shading issues, right? Because the verts are crashing into each other. Right, so another inset, and then I'm going to move it across this way. Another inset, just a bit. In fact, where these get so close, I'm going to hold down Control and click verts so that the verts remain selected. Go up to the weld dialog box and just use the threshold value, and they'll be welded up, right? This is the quick way to do it. You can always like fine tune this to make those edges straight or whatever. No big deal. Okay, so do another little inset. Let's pull it out. And I'm like, oh, I forgot to do these ones, or I could have done them all at the same time, but don't worry, I can just delete these faces. Right, delete all that junk that we don't see. Right, and then my favourite modifier of all time is the symmetry modifier in Max. So easy to use compared to Maya. It just does what you expect. You can also just move the mirror where you want it. Right, the mirror itself is based on the pivot point of the object. Right, nothing to do with the position in the world or anything like that. You can choose which axis. You can flip. Right, and the cool other thing you can do is just add another symmetry on top of that. Right, and they're all working together, and then one more. Boom, the whole thing's done, and you can also set a weld seam threshold, so it's just all welded up. So as soon as I do an edit poly, I can check to see if this is all connected, and it is. Try to do that in Maya. Let's see how long it takes you, because I freaking don't like Maya for stuff like this. And Blender I don't even care to know about, because I think Blender and Max are kind of similar in little ways. The modifier system is more is similar. Right. Okay, so I'm going to show you that. Now, another thing a lot of new 3D modelers forget is this problem, faceted faces. So every model has got its own little normals that point out the way, right? And that's what makes the light hit off them and make some kind of shading. In this case, each little face has got their own little rays pointing to the light individually, right? Instead of being shared and blending between them. So imagine 4 little daggers coming from the corner of this, and they're all pointing the same way. Imagine I decide to say, okay, let's the daggers share the direction with the direction of this face, and vice versa, right? And this share the direction just at this point. They'll get a kind of soft blend, right? You can actually look at normals if you do edit normals, and change the length of these the handle. Let's do it very small, like that. You can actually see that very thing. If I choose the face here, it will light up the normals for that face. Now you would think it was this one, but it's not. It's perpendicular to the face when it's flat shaded like that. It's basically lit 90 degrees off the face, right? And you can move these normals around. You can rotate and move them and get it to look at different points of. It's basically like, what way is this polygon facing, and you can distort that, right? That's essentially what a normal map does at a pixel level. It distorts the at a pixel level, it distorts the way the light hits it, so to speak, so it looks like a bump, right? It looks like a bump only because it's shining at the light at different angles, right? So I can make it dark and light because I make it pointing at the light more, and so on. Right, but I can make it share with the rest of it. I'm not going to do it through edit normals because that's too technical, right? There's too much information there to mess about with. But if you use smooth, you might think smooth is like Maya's mesh smooth. When you press 3, I think it basically does like a turbo smooth modifier or a subdivision modifier, and that's what annoys me about Maya as well. People press that and they go, my model looks great now, but when I export it, it's all gone because you need to apply it. It's like a modifier. Maya's just, if you get used to Maya, right, you understand these things. Like any other tool, you understand these things. So that's actually like turbo smooth. Now smooth is more like, in Maya, it's like soft edges, and you can do it with a dialog box, and you can control the angle before it decides to share those normals with its neighbor, right? It's literally what is the threshold before it decides to share the normal angle with a neighboring polygon. Now the angle between these two faces is quite shallow, right? It's only about 5 degrees or something between each of these faces. So as soon as I go back past 5 degrees or so, boom, these are all sharing their normal with each other. If I can actually go edit normals, and now you can see that, right? they're no longer pointing in different directions. They've averaged out, and that's basically what average is. I can choose faces here and here and click average selected, right? And it's gonna give me, well, a similar thing. It's also bending these, but you can do it at the edge level, I suppose, right? And it'll give me a similar thing. Right, so that's what smoothing sort of is, but smoothing makes these into groups as well, which are handy. You can make smoothing groups and use them for different things, can be handy. Right. So that just does a threshold, and you can keep going with that. And you know, I've got past 26 degrees, which is the angle between these two faces. This slope and that face must be about what, 20, 24, 25. Yeah, see, it just pops after 25, 26. Okay. So you only need it where you need it. Smoothing groups is handy, or this smooth modifier is handy if you use turbo smooth. You can see it does that, but you can make it be based on smooth groups. And this is where you get this craziness happening. This is where you need to add loads of edge loops. Adding edge loops on a rounded surface, that's another chapter. But for example, if I turn off that and then do an edit poly, and let's put the wireframe on, and let's say I want to do like an edge loop across here, it won't let me, right? If I try and add an edge loop, which you can do through edit, geometry, where is it? Swift loop. Right, I have this shortcutted so that I just can add edge loops really quickly. Right, if you can't see this, this is under the ribbon here. It's kind of like newish features. Right, and it's adding an edge loop around there, which is going to support this particular shape when it's smooth, but it doesn't need that support. It needs a cut right across there. Right, and if I add a cut across there, it's going to support this jank more than I need. Right, so it gets a bit complicated. Let's just do it anyway. I'll show you how to do this. If you go to slice plane and you rotate the slice plane, I'm going to turn on the angle snap up here. Turn it on to it's let's do that again, to it's like flat, so it's 90 degrees, so it's cutting straight through, and I'm going to move it up. You can see it's starting to make this cut across there. Right, and then I click slice. I'm going to do the same underneath. Okay, click slice. Right, and now because I've done that to this particular group, I'm going to move back up to edit poly and click turbo smooth, and you can see how it's obviously still trying to do the same thing. It's all crashing over each other, right? But this bit is probably a little bit better managed, potentially, like here. But you have to add all kinds of these edge loops to support shapes in various places, and it can be a mess, a nightmare. It can try your patience, but we have to do it, right? We have to learn to do these things. Right, if I do it now, you can see how it's holding the shape better, and I can do a second one on top of that. Right, how this is all crashing in, but this is held just a little bit better, not perfect. Right, that takes a whole other getting used to, all that stuff. So I kind of wish I didn't show you, because you'll be like, oh, it gets messy, right? You have to have a lot of respect for 3D modeling and learn these things gradually. Not just like jump into, I want to make a Ferrari, I want to make the most cool car anyone's ever made as a junior modeler, right? As a less than junior modeler, right? You want to get good at understanding how quads work first, how polys work, how an edge loop is going to cut through this. Is it going to cut through this? It needs to be a quad for one. It needs to have the edge flow through it. It needs to have, when you add an edge loop, through that menu, swift loop, edit swift loop, right? Modeling, edit swift loop. When you add that there, it should cut through it, and you need edge support here. And yeah, you could probably merge them together at that point. and then if you add the turbo smooth, this holds a bit better, right? These are things, you know, look, without any work on it, right, how it's all making this shape, with work on it, how it's making a better topology, right? But this, it can be better, right? Could switch this off and improve it more. Maybe I can just choose these three and collapse them together. Right, maybe I can put a wedge lip here to support that. Maybe I can just bind these up together like so, and try turbo smooth on that. And you see how it makes different kind of shapes, how it pinches up here, and if you check the wireframe you can see why, right? But you kind of want to keep the whole rounded area untouched, because if I start to add edge lips here, it will just be holding that shape more. And I've seen people make like wheels and stuff, and they add edge lips to everything, like they bevel absolutely every face, so they don't really, and then they'll sort of smooth it, they'll turbo smooth, subdivide it, so it doesn't really lose, it doesn't really know how to fix those areas. So there's a lot to think about there, right? And there's obviously a lot to explain, and this video alone will get you so far, right? But you have to keep practicing and understanding why does, when I make this shape and I do a turbo smooth on it, make this shape, right? If you're not happy with it, right? If you're happy with it, that's fine. If that's good enough for you with a couple of subdivisions, you've got a decent high poly version of whatever the hell you want, right? But if you're really nitpicky about I don't like that, then you might want to be like, okay, I'll put the topology this way, then that way, right? Maybe that will help it. Then I'll get rid of these, because you don't want it to be using those triangles. You don't want it to triangulate, quadrify those triangles when it's subdivided, if you know what I'm saying. Like, okay, so it might be like that, and maybe for you that's neater, right? That's nicer. For me, it's a bit nicer. Right. Okay, let's say you didn't want it to curve here. Then you need edge loops that retain this angle, right? So the loops need to go here to support this particular edge, right? Now let's try a couple of edge loops here. Let's do one or two there, and we'll see what happens. Okay, it's held it, but it's done this horrible pinching here because this the topology here is just one big end gone. So what you'd maybe do is inset a few times, right, until you get to the point where the verts are crashing. Control click the verts, do a weld threshold to make them go together, click the face again, do another inset till you get to the point where there goes a bit of crashing there. I'm just going to just choose them and collapse them. Okay, collapse is actually there. I've got it to a shortcut key. You can even do it early if you want, it's not going to affect the shape, right? Just as long as you're avoiding those endgons and you understand quads and triangles and how they change and stuff like that, then you can definitely retain the shape better. Now you can see how this one buckles up because I was not really mindful about that corner there. Right, but here's another cool thing that you could probably do. So let's say I was happy with that before turbo smooth, right? This section at least. What I can do is just do an edit poly on top of that. I can delete faces at the edit poly level, right? Delete all these faces. This one I'm just, doesn't matter because I'm gonna do something different here. I'm gonna use symmetry, right? And this is why it's important that the pivot is the middle of the circle, because the symmetry we want to be correct. Okay, symmetry, and I'm actually going to rotate this with the snap zone to 45 degrees. And let's just see what angle it is I need. There. Is that what I wanted? Oh, it's not the symmetry I want to rotate, it's the mirror I want to rotate. Right, to 45 degrees. Okay, and then you can see if I toggle that, it's actually giving me this section down here, which is super handy. Now I can put another symmetry modifier on it, just a regular one, flip that, another one, flip that, that way, and another one for Z, and let's do flip because that's what we want there. It looks a mess, right? It does look a mess. Let's just do a smooth, auto smooth, and get it to like there. Do a turbo smooth on it. Let's do it by smoothing groups, so that it's basically holding the shape even more. And then do turbo smooth without smoothing groups. A couple of iterations, and boom, you've got quite a nice high poly version of that. Alright. That was probably, for a lot of people, what the hell did they just do? Yeah. But the only thing that really matters is that you are sure about your topology. I mean, that corner isn't actually perfect. There, you see how this edge loop goes through and it actually makes this more, and how at the very end it sort of, it will make the shape, it was probably not noticeable, but if you look at the mesh density, it's a bit denser there, right? And it's probably trying to retain that shape a little bit more. Now it's definitely not noticeable, but I could easily just go back to, let's just turn these, you don't have to turn them off, you can turn off this modifier stack result and go back to here, right? And see where it happened. It happened after this, so I can do an edit poly at that stage, choose the edges and double click that. And you can see I'm not sure about getting rid of it because it does that. I can get rid of it where I don't want it. So I'll double click the whole edge loop, right, and then I'll just unselect to there, I guess, control backspace, and but now I've got this end gone, I have to deal with it, so I'll just make it like that, like a triangle there, and that shouldn't affect anything, right? Only need it on this side. I don't even actually need these polys at all because I do all the symmetry and stuff on it. Okay, final result. Let's come out of edges for that. Why is it still showing edges? Let's turn that off. Let's go back to, a bit fiddly sometimes. I think it's this one. See, when I clicked it, it went straight into vertex and come back out, right? You'll learn that. You'll learn that through time. Right? You can just come out of it, whatever, but you don't want it to show those verts. So now it's all the quads here are the same size. So these are the kind of things you learn when you're maybe doing some high poly type stuff, hard surface, high poly, something that you would essentially then go ahead and bake, right? So if I was to make a low poly version of this, the easiest way to do it is just to make a cylinder, right? And because the pivot is the center of this, let's just make it a different color, right? I would just basically align it to that, right? And just do center to center, or whatever you want to do, pivot point to pivot points. Better actually do pivot point to pivot point because it's important that the objects are seen to be in the same place, right? And then I'll do height to this. It's going that way. Alright, I'll move it there. I'll do a bit of height to it, and then if I want the pivot to be the same, let's move it back a bit more. I want it to be kind of best of both worlds, right? I could just do symmetry on it. Let's just do same place, put symmetry on it, so we get the same result. There we go, exactly the same. Right, collapse 2. Let's have a look at the mesh. Right, and get rid of this. Let's do edit poly. Get rid of this this middle line, and let's just choose each face here and do inset and collapse. Right, just makes them go to their own midpoint. They won't collapse in each other like you'd expect. They won't try to merge together because these are in the way. Right, it's clever enough not to do that. So if we come back out, I'm going to talk about something else that's a little bit technical. So let's say this dark blue one's my low poly and it's got UVs, and this is my high poly with all the detail. You can see how it doesn't quite line up, right? At certain stages when it tries to bake the information from the high poly, it's going to like miss in these little waves. It's basically going to do this kind of like whoosh as it tries to reach the high poly. It doesn't really know it has to be a perfectly rounded shape. It doesn't really care. It's just one of those things where you'd be like, okay, well, maybe I should give this more sides to actually match it better, right? Different ways you can do that at this stage. You can add edge loops and hold down shift, right, like that. Or you could just subdivide it based on smooth groups and maybe get a bit of a mess. I'll just do it this way because I know it will give me the result I want, right? So it's kind of done a more rounded version of it. It still will be a little bit swoopy in places, right? But it's one way to do it. And if it's as simple as a cylinder anyway, you can just make a new cylinder, right? I'd suggest if you are trying to make it avoid this artifacting that will happen when you bake, is to have more sides that you're going to optimize later. So you could make a new cylinder and then give it loads of sides and it reduce them later, but you might still get something right. So in order to bake this, it needs UVs. The easiest way to UV is to do a unwrap UVW modifier in Max, this one. And I'd say it's the best way to UV. It's not the only way to UV or anything. It's the best way to UV. Not the fastest, but I'll give you something. Like I can look at all these faces, right? Choose all the faces, turn that off so I select them all. And I can do cylinder based, and I can orient the cylinder like so. And it will give me something, right? But it's not perfect. It's not really cared about the faces here, so I can choose them separately. I do planar or even box projection. You have to sort of mess with these values sometimes. It doesn't always work. So I'll just do planar and view angle, and then move it aside, and then I click this button to pack. And I think one of these faces, this one, I need to flip because I was looking straight through the model and it's actually, this face is facing the other way, so need flipped. Right, flipped it. If I do tool, relax, apply, that'll start to fix some things, right? The cool thing about Max is it does it kind of in slow motion if you want. And you see this happen. And it's much better at straightening out these cylindrical edges than Maya. Much better. Like the amount of times I've tried Maya and it sort of fails halfway. The most perfect shape sometimes. I don't know. Beats me. Right, you want to throw a checker on it. Up here, do checker just to make sure these squares look square. Right, and you also want to consider how much texel density things take up. So if this was my object, I'd consider my texture size being a 2:1 ratio, so maybe like 512 by 256, or 1024 by 512. Or you can do it a different way. We can just put in an extra cut. Now you don't want to have seam lines everywhere, especially if you're using texturing that doesn't consider how it is going to solve that. But you can do triplanar texturing, which I'll show you later. Right, so I'll just put a cut in there. That's now this split into two islands. And if I do pack again, you can see how those squares suddenly got smaller because there's more texture density would fit into those, more pixels. Okay, you can see how they don't line up, right? But if you bring this to Substance Painter, you can bake, you can do like a projected texture to cover the seams. You can do it manually, or you can mask it out after it's done the whole object. These are other things that you would learn. Okay, so that's the UVs done for the low poly. Now you do your naming. So CYL low. Come out with that and choose this one. And we're going to do UVs for this. I'm joking, we don't do UVs for the high poly. doesn't need it, right? The UVs are just for the thing that's receiving the texture, and it's going to receive the normal map, right, from the information of the high poly, right? All these shapes. It's just going to fake it. It's going to fake these shapes through a normal map, right? It's not going to get the actual depth of it. We can think about that another time, right? But the low poly is super low poly right now. Okay, so this is going to be CYL high. Okay, and you can export both of them together if you're using Marmoset Toolbag, just both of them together. If you're using Substance Painter, you export your lows separate. You know, you might have cylinder low, box low, such and such low, arm low, all as one low file, and then a corresponding high file which has got all the high poly versions of everything in the same place. With Substance Painter, you probably have to move the meshes away from each other. There's a problem with it projecting onto itself, which I've not really seen a fix for yet. Maybe there's a fix coming, but this is why I use Marmoset Toolbag, because it's been there for a long time and Substance is still to catch up. Prove me wrong, maybe they've fixed it. I know you can do some things like that and the naming and stuff, but I still had problems with it. So I'm going to export these two. Desktop, let's call it low high test. Sorry if people are trying to chat to me on the stream, I'm not really paying attention to it. I don't have it up. Turbo mesh, tessellated, yeah, whatever. Hopefully it just comes in. Let's use Toolbag 3 because I still use Toolbag 3 for baking. If I have a problem, I switch to Toolbag 4, but if it works in 3, I'm happy. Import models, desktop, low high test. Okay, so there you go. It's actually gave us triangulated versions as well. Sure, whatever. It's not going to matter too much because we're not really taking it out of this software, but I'll leave it triangulated for now. And let's do baked baker group, baker set, low into low, high into high. And if you click on the low cage here, you can change the cage opacity and play with the offset value. Okay, and you want to cover all that grey stuff, the colour of the high poly material. Yes, you want an output path. You can choose a Photoshop document if you want. I don't like that because when I click on it, it opens up Photoshop. Right? Maybe some people think that's a good thing, but for me, I'll just do PNG because it's pretty much the final file type I use, and it makes it more compatible with certain viewers, I suppose. Let's just do new folder, bake test 1, and call it CYL for now. Right, so let's just set up the everything that we need to do. I'm just going to hide the high poly just so you can see what happens. Now you also notice I have a hard edge here, right? If you really want a cleaner bake, you sometimes need to put a hard edge where angles are like 90 degrees, but you really just want to have it all average normals. I'll show you the difference because some people still depend on it for cleaner bakes. Okay, let's just do normals and bake. So we're just going to bake a normal map, click P for preview, and H to hide the high poly, which is hidden already. I want to turn that wireframe off, so wireframe, where are you? Render wireframe. Right, there's the low poly. But Rob, it looks like the high poly. Yeah, but does it really? Look at the jankiness, right? And then you see this kind of weird ba-bum, 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 right? That's where it's trying to meet the high poly. This is further away from it, right? It's more rounded. It's further away. It's like an arc, but there it gets close. So it's just a byproduct of baking, right? But by the time that's this size, it's fine. Little paracetamol pill, that's what I need right now. Right, and it's all baked. Boom. So then you'd bake other stuff. Go to your baker and do curvature, ambient occlusion. It's my other favourite ones. You would put the resolution to 4K, the samples to 64x. I usually leave it 8 bits per channel for maximum compatibility with other things, because some things don't like 16 bits per channel, it messes up. And then we should have more information. The ambient occlusion takes the longest time and hogs the GPU, so it's probably causing a bit of a lag right now. And let's just click P again, so we'll assign at least the ambient occlusion to this, and I can bring in the curvature as an albedo just to see how it looks. A bit noisy, but whatever. Right, that's gave us something that is obviously got the look of it being high poly. Right, the way the light hits it, you would think it's the high poly one. Let's enable the high poly and move it aside. Right, let's make the material just a little bit more like that one. Can you really tell which is which from far away? Only from there you can see there's a bit more depth. Right, but as it becomes more face on, they're literally very similar. Right, you can have one, just needs to be a bit darker. You can have one be this state that it's in when you're up close to it, right? That's what you call LODs, level of detail. So high level of detail, and it would switch down to something lower, until it's like at its lowest version when it's further away, right? And these things are sometimes automated through the game engines, or you make them manually and you import them, put them into certain sections based on distance from camera. Right, so if you had your whole low poly thing done, you kind of no longer need, your baking setup or whatever. You just got your finished low poly, and then you're like, okay, now I want to light it and make it look good. Then you want to make sure you catch all the nice details and maybe support it with an extra light or two and some shadows and some extra color, right? And some post-process like a little bit of bloom if you want, or ambient occlusion. Mess around with the GI. Mess around with the light strength and width and shape and brightness, all that stuff, right? You would mess around with that. Add a shadow catcher. Control U will hide that. And then you can do like a final render of it, put in your folio, right? You wouldn't put this in your folio, first ever model by Rob, from Rob's teaching. Yeah, I'd be so proud of you if you managed to pull this off in the same day if you're new to this. But if you are new to 3D, this is probably a good little workflow for you. It's a bit of my workflow. Obviously there's Substance Painter side, which I'm going to cover now. Why don't I bake in Substance Painter? Can anyone tell me why? I think I explained it earlier. It's to do with if you've got a bunch of low poly objects all part of the same file, and you've got high poly objects as well, and they're all kind of very close to parts of a character, they tend to project to each other unless you explode them, and I'm sure there's a magic button for it that I've not discovered yet. Right, in Substance Painter, sorry, the UI is super tiny. What the let's try to reset you. Why? Oh my god, I can barely, it's like gone to 4K craziness. Don't know why or when this happened, but I can barely see anything. When did this happen? Okay, I need to Google this. Substance Painter, too small, 4K. Yeah, scale 4K, okay. Unfortunately, there's no what? It's horrible, yeah. But I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've had this. It's the first time I've had this. Maybe to make to scale with Windows within Windows settings. Right, anyway, we need to kind of go down that road, right? Maybe you'll follow me, maybe you won't, but I'm basically going to do a new file. I'm leaving the default settings, everything default. I'm going to select the top thing, select your low poly mesh, right? I only need the low poly, I don't need the low and high like I had before. I only need the thing that had the UVs that got the texture baked to it, so export, selected. I'm going to call it low thing. Low thing. Sorry about the UI. Happens, I suppose. And let's just do, let's keep triangulated checked because I've baked with triangulation, I just want to keep that triangulation consistent now. Right, you might not want to do it that way. And oh yeah, I was going to show you the baking with the softened normals and stuff. I'll show you that as well in a second. So where was that? Loading. Pardon me. Right, so that's loaded in there. Let's go back to Marmoset for a second. So I just want to talk about where that hard edge, oh, you don't notice it so much actually, where I made the hard edge at the side and the low poly. Do you know what, that doesn't look too bad. I'm not fussed about it, right? So the only reason I did that is because the angle between this face and any one of these faces was like 90 degrees. So I made that hard edge just to make sure the normal map didn't have to bend over backwards to try and make this work. These are things again that you'll discover and you'll make your own mind up about how you change these in the future. Alright, just making you aware of it. Alright, so now I've got this in Substance Painter. Yeah, by all means you could bring your low and high in and do the baking here, but I like to just import my resources now. I don't believe the UI is going so small though. I honestly don't know when this happened because I've been fine for a long time. I can barely see what I'm doing. Import resources, add resources, and bake the baked stuff, bake test 1. I'm going to import my baked maps. I'm going to put them into texture, each of them, and I'll just do current session import. Every time I do some tutorial something comes up, and this is that. So now I'm going to go to texture set settings and select or drag in the normal map that I baked from Toolbag, right? And you can see it still looks good. The curvature map too, and the AO map. Right, these will be the 3 key driver maps in most cases. You might have other things like ID, position, and whatnot, right? But that's all we really need here. Those are my driver maps. I don't have to bake any mesh maps here because I've baked them already in my preferred baking Toolbag, right? Go back to my layers, and now I can go to materials. Sorry, I can just barely see this. Let's close that. Let's choose some smart material. I don't have very many smart materials, I promise. I've got quite a lot, but I don't have many compared to some. I'm just going to drag this MK collection and drag it on there. Right, and that looks already pretty cool. Right, you can see where it doesn't match where the seam lines of the UVs are, where the UVs don't connect. Right, but I can duplicate that layer. Just do duplicate if you can, please. Thank you. Duplicate layer, and I really need to sort this out. All the stuff that's getting put onto this layer, I want to change it a bit. I want to change from UV projection to triplanar. Right, and that means it's getting projected as opposed to be based on the UVs. Right, you might have to change masks as well. I wish they had a universal button for this, like just convert everything to UV based triplanar. That would be nice. Right, so if I toggle this, can see it's doing something, but it's not quite. Let's go to each mask, and that's triplanar. That's fine. There's a lot of stuff here that needs to be triplanar. I'll be here all day. Alright, these are just levels adjusts and stuff. That one's triplanar. I'm just changing everything that says UV to triplanar, like the mask as well as the layers themselves. I think we're okay now. Triplanar. See how that changed. Base color, triplanar, and the mask is okay, I think. Alright, so I'm going to toggle this one. So this is UV based, where it shows the seam line quite badly. And then this is triplanar based, where it kind of covers it up. Kind of. Not perfectly, right? But it kind of covers it up. Sort of. Right, and if you prefer that, then that's cool. You might just want to say, right, let's just have it like 50% or so. So it does just a little bit of covering it up. Right. What's better, what's worse, you can also add a mask to it and paint on it. So I could add a black mask, which means none of it's going to work until I paint white in the mask, and that lets it work, lets that layer actually do its job. And I can make this kind of soft. Like I could do that, right? And just some dots. And then choose an alpha brush that's really kind of even dottier and stuff, and grunge it all up. But I can do other stuff. I can add modifiers to the actual mask, right, and make it work a bit better. So this mask, I can say add filter, and then choose a filter like a blur. Sorry, it's impossible for you to see this, because it's impossible for me to see this as well. It's just gone nuts, the resolution. I feel like I've got an 8K monitor as opposed to a 4K one. But there you go. So I've just blurred up some of that there. And the cool thing is this happens after the painting. It's not like it's, you know, it's not doing anything else, right? I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's adding blur to this masking that I'm adding, right? And it's automatically blurring it, so it's better, right? And I've kind of painted out the problem with the UV based there. I've just covered it with triplanar, just where I need it, right? Not everywhere. Right, there's obviously a whole lot of other stuff you can do, right? This isn't any particular object, by the way. I mean, it could be something, could be some prop used in a gymnasium or God knows what, in an old factory, right? Whatever. I can even go into, so I can go into this. This one's obviously getting used mostly. This one's only just covering up some edges. But I can toggle each layer to see what it's actually affecting. Base color, edges, some dirt. This dirt I don't like. I don't like the scratches being pretty consistent. So you can reduce the tiling a bit. I don't know if I actually did it. Let's see the masks. No. Grunge splats. There. The last thing you want is for your texture to be very noticeable that it's tiling, right? So I would say just scale it up, rotate it a bit, fade it a bit more, and then layer it up with a kind of copy of itself or something, right? So I'm just going to duplicate the layer. Duplicate layer, right? And then play with those settings again. Oh, which one is it? This one. Grunge splats, there we go. Bit of tiling, rotation, play with the opacity. Oh, I just took it away by accident. Play with the opacity, and you'll get a kind of mixed version of it, right? I just hate seeing very obvious tiling. It's just it doesn't really show any attention to detail or care for your work. Slapdash boom, you know, just avoid that attitude. Right, let's say you want something on the edges. We'll just do, I was going to do just regular fill layer just to show you what happens. Oh, that's quite nice. Some white paint. Okay, let's say we've painted some of this white. And let's say the paint has worn away at the edges, for example. Right, so everything's white apart from the edges. So what I would do is add a black mask, right, to say none of it's getting through until I say so. And I do add generator. And then in the generator, I choose curvature. Okay, sorry it's so hard to see this, but it's just 4K monitor or something's gone nuts and scaled everything down, and I don't know why. So global invert, you want to click that because we only want the paint to be in non-edge areas. That's what curvature map is, basically detecting edges and also detecting cavities, but in this case it's like more focused on edges, which you can actually go into curvature and see its edges mode. You can say be cavities, you can say be dual, unprocessed, whatever. So I'll just do edges, and you can play with these values, right? And the more you play with these values, the more you see what's happening. But don't just make some random settings and be like, yeah, that's good, done. Like, you'd have to be understanding what is actually happening, for one, by looking and playing with the sliders, getting to know all of these things, right? Brightness, contrast, get to know everything about what it's doing. Right, there we go. So I've got paint, perfect paint everywhere apart from the edges. Now you can also add in a texture, right? Use a texture. You can find the texture asset somewhere, or can you? I forget where it is. Texture, opacity. Alright, it's using some texture, I don't know where it is though. Scale. What texture is it using? Ah, it's here. Okay, so now I can choose texture of some kind and play with the values of that, so we get some form of something mixing in. Right, as a kind of noise texture. And it looks bad. It looks bad. Triplane, I'll say true. Scale, I'll play with that scale again. And triplane is not doing a good job, so let's just do that. False. Yeah, it's not really ideal. Let's try a different texture. Let's see if there's some sort of noise. There we go, this is better, right? And you get a little bit of extra crunch where you want it. Let's try triplanar this time. It's really struggling with the scale for some reason. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, right, it's still not 100% like paint. I recommend at some point just go here and do add paint, which is you painting the mask manually with black and white, right, and then getting a nice alpha. And there's a whole bunch of alphas. I wish they just put the noisier ones kind of more in reach, right? But then you would sort of play with that, press X, and you can take some away, change the opacity and flow and stuff. And take a bit of time to make it look interesting, right? If you're doing like a skateboard, for example, and you wanted the paintwork to be cool, you know, spend time making that cool. You can bring any Photoshop or images in as a layer and position them as well. Spend as long as it takes to make it perfect, right? Think of it as a toy model that you've modelled yourself with your own hands, and you're finally getting around to painting it. If you spend a lot of hours in each stage, you're going to make it look shit in the end? No. So, you know, make it look good. spend the time you need to make it look good. Takes as long as it takes is the terminology I like to say. Takes as long as it takes. You know, depending what kind of level you want to push it to, right? Do you want to just make it acceptable, mediocre level? You've had a go at it, or do you want to really make it sing this time? You'll go through a lot of phases as you learn 3D stuff, texturing and whatnot, and all these cool things, right? And I can just change this base color to whatever. Red paint, blue paint. Play with the other values here, like the height, information, the roughness, metallic paint can make it look a bit silly. So that is basically it. That's the most fundamental pipeline. I'll probably switch to Marmoset Toolbag 4 for texturing in the future, but I'm not in any hurry to do that. Just when I lose my Substance license, I guess, because I can't really see this UI. I hope this is a helpful stream and video I'll put on YouTube, and please check out my work on ArtStation. Feel free to buy any of my products, like and subscribe my YouTube, look out for future videos. Hope this helps a few of you get started and making some props to begin with, and building your way up to whatever you want to make, bigger props or furniture or environments or characters. Each sort of big chunks of time in that order. You know, small props you can do in a day, bigger props may take you a week. Guns and things might take you a week and a bit, maybe longer, and full characters can take weeks, months, depending on the complexity, even sometimes a year if it's like a main character for a game. And if you put in that much time to something, you'll learn a lot. You'll look good in your folio and you'll likely get a job from it. And it's not like you'll be expected to rush the job. You know, your pace will get faster the more you do stuff like that. So just keep practicing, and I'll catch you guys. Bye.